Thank you. First of all, I'd like to formally apologize that I won't be here for Richard Woman's presentation at 4 o'clock, where he has promised to define innovation in ways less sort of intellectually complicated, but more powerful than what I'll try to do. What I'd like to try to do is give you like a handful of examples of different ideas that we're sort of pursuing right now. First of all, I think one sort of main sort of point of attack is that architects cannot be just sort of designers of beautiful facades or even sort of designers of expressive sculptures. We have to become designers of ecosystems where we channel not only the flow of people but also the flow of resources through our cities and buildings as a sort of an entire man-made ecosystem. And the reason for the importance of this sort of expanded role of architecture you can find in the atmosphere of this photo. It was taken in Copenhagen at the COP15, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. And as you can see on the faces of Merkel and Brown, especially Sarkozy, even Obama, it wasn't exactly a party. It was a complete failure. None of the goals that had been established were reached, and the general discussion about sustainability was sort of drowning in the misconception that sustainability is a question of how much of our current life quality are we prepared to sacrifice in order to afford being sustainable. This sort of Protestant idea that it has to hurt to do good. So when we were asked to sort of make a proposal for the Danish pavilion at the Shanghai World Expo, where the theme was sustainable cities, we thought about what about a different kind of sustainability? What if sustainability could actually increase life quality and human enjoyment? We decided to consolidate all of the elements of Danish city life into a pavilion. So we designed the pavilion as a sort of streetscape, complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen and the sort of Danish city bikes. Because in Copenhagen, 37% of the Copenhageners commute by bicycle. So no one is ever stuck in a traffic jam. You could even bicycle through the pavilion. Whereas like last year, there was an 11-day traffic jam in Shanghai. So some poor bastard was stuck in his vehicle for 11 days. That's the exact opposite of human enjoyment. Also in Copenhagen, our harbor water has become so clean you can swim in it. Our first design was the Copenhagen harbor bath that extends public life into the water. And we thought we'd do the same in Shanghai, allow the visitors to experience on their own bodies how clean, if not how cold, Danish harbor water is. And finally, sort of to capture the attention of the Chinese, we discovered that in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, which means that all Chinese grew up with the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So we proposed to move the mermaid to China, not a copy, but the actual mermaid would go. That provoked the Danish equivalent of the Tea Party, the Danish Nationalist Party, to pass a law specifically against moving the mermaid. So I had to go to Parliament and argue her case. As you can see, we got her. We had to get her through Chinese customs. And finally she made it to China. So this was sort of our first take on this idea about hedonistic sustainability, how sustainable cities and buildings can actually increase our quality of life. In China, at the same time, we got invited to look at doing a headquarter building for the energy company of Shenzhen, one of the most sort of industrious regions in the world. And it's essentially a gigantic, a 1 million square foot office building. In a humid subtropical climate, you have a dilemma with office buildings because you want daylight so people can see what they're doing, but you want to avoid, and you want views, but you want to avoid the glare and thermal exposure in the warm climate. So we designed the facade simply as this sort of zigzag, almost like a pleated dress that blocks all of the sort of direct sun from the south, but opens up completely to the north. So when you look north, you have views and this sort of soft daylight coming in, when you look south, you have these sort of bamboo veneer panels bathed in daylight. And within this logic, we can sort of play with the texture, so we can like increase, you know, the sky lobby for the headquarter building is located here. You have a stack of executive meeting rooms. We can create entrances. So playing with this sort of Issey Miyake fabric, we can sort of solve all the properties of the building. And this very basic idea that has nothing to do with technology or something mechanical reduces the thermal exposure with almost 30%, and as a consequence reduces the energy consumption for the air conditioning. So it's essentially the building ends up looking differently because it performs differently. And another sort of idea we've been pursuing as a way of exploiting synergy in the city is what we call architectural alchemy, that you can actually create, if not gold, then added value by mixing different ingredients. We did a building called The Mountain in Copenhagen that turns you know, a parking structure and an apartment building into a mountain of homes with gardens, giving everybody a sort of a private garden with a penthouse view, but putting it in a dense context, resting on this sort of foundation of cars. The facade itself is perforated and naturally ventilated, and from a distance it really becomes a literal mountain. And this idea we took one step further in something called the 8 House, which is essentially a building that exploits the synergy of like shops and offices that wants to be closer to the ground, townhouses and apartments, and actually turns them into sort of a man-made mountain path. It's right on the city limits of Copenhagen, so it's really like the sort of clash of life forms. And what happens is that this sort of idea of architectural alchemy does not only allow us to sort of optimize the conditions for the different programs. In this case, you can see like the townhouses are lifted on top of the offices to come up in the sun. So to the north, the offices become like a 4-story office building, lifting all of the townhouses up in the sunlight. But it also allows the possibility for spontaneous social encounters, the creation of a community or a neighborhood that is traditionally restricted to occurring on the street is actually invited to invade the 3-dimensional space of the city block. So the 8 House is not just a pretty facade or an expressive sculpture, it's really a 3-dimensional urban condition that carves out various niches for social life to insert itself throughout the 3-dimensional space of the city. And of course, in a sort of country completely flat, it's also the only place where you can actually go for a walk and enjoy the view. So this sort of idea of architectural alchemy, of course, you can do it when you have the possibility to start from scratch. But recently we got a job in Basel, in Switzerland, in this new art district, where an existing warehouse, a really big, deep, solid concrete building, was going to be converted and expanded, and it's like Swiss craftsmanship. So the columns, everything is like perfectly executed. The columns are powerful enough to carry 3 more floors. The problem is that it's going to be like shops and restaurants and galleries, offices and apartments. But because of the incredible depth of the warehouse, there's not enough light for the apartments. So we thought, instead of just having light from 2 sides, if we consider the building 5 point houses that we gently rotate, we can actually provide daylight from 4 sides instead of 2. We do this in such a way that even though the geometry is rotated, the columns actually line up with the existing grid, so it's 2 different geometries but the same structure. And that allows us to, we sort of adapt the new building to the geometry of the existing warehouse. And of course that ends up maximizing the amount of daylight that the building gets. You get these like nice little courtyards. We carve out holes to bring daylight deep into the upper floors. So we create these double height spaces for live-work units. This sort of more hybrid loft typology. These nice little gardens sitting on top of the existing warehouse. So essentially, it's literally two completely different architectures that are merged to create some kind of a friendly hybrid. And you can say, so as a very basic idea, it's almost like turning the traditional courtyard building inside out, because the courtyard is a communal space for the residents. Traditionally, it's incarcerated behind a wall of program. In this case, by turning it inside out, you actually have the privacy and the intimacy of the communal courtyard, but with the penthouse view lifted up above the roofs of the surrounding Basel and into the sort of penthouse, like almost like a penthouse for the people. We're missing one letter. Yeah. There's a little crop. You can see, like in all the projects I've shown so far, they're actually privately commissioned. They're sort of driven by a private investor who has a specific need or a specific investment that needs a return. But because like these projects really become part of the city, like let's say like 95 or 99% of the buildings that constitute our cities are actually privately commissioned in one form or the other. And if they would just like care for their own specific functions, we would eventually have like a very poor urban space. Whereas if all buildings attempt to become sort of good citizens and contribute, we will gradually, constantly sort of create an ever-evolving urban realm that makes our cities more and more interesting to live in. We have done a few projects that deal much more specifically with the public. We were asked to compete to design the City Hall of Tallinn, this beautiful UNESCO medieval city. And our main idea was, instead of having the traditional dichotomy where you have the politicians inside and the public outside, we would lift the city hall above the town square, creating a continuous public realm, forming what we called the public service marketplace, where the citizens can go and interact with the public servants and see the politicians at work. It's conceived as a village of each department has its own building. They're sort of consolidated to create a continuous institution. In one place, the citizens can enjoy the roof and the view of the surrounding city. And one last thing, this is the existing city hall with this tower. In the master plan, they anticipated a spire. So we thought, like, let's put the city council inside the tower. But let's give them this sort of really generous space for political reflection. And let's make the ceiling into one gigantic mirror. So when the politicians have to make difficult decisions, all they have to do is look up, and they get this sort of periscope overview of the city that they're messing with. As a side effect, when the angry citizens gather outside, they get this sort of a perfect overview of the city council. See if people are absent or sleeping or doing dirty deals or playing Angry Birds. So we call it the democratic periscope that combines political overview with public insight. And to our luck, the city council liked the idea, and we're breaking ground in the spring. So of course, like the city hall is also very much a question of identity. That Tallinn wants to be sort of a city that is viewed as like democratic and transparent. Another project that deals maybe more with identity than anything else was we were competing to design the National Art Museum of Greenland. Greenland just got independence or partial independence from Denmark. And one of the first things they wanted to do was to do a Greenlandic National Art Gallery. It's located on the waterfront in this like incredibly beautiful landscape next to these ugly social housing projects from the 70s built by the Danish. And our basic idea was to sort of put like all Arctic vernacular architecture typologies are circular, because you can, with a minimum of perimeter, you can create a maximum interior. But instead of sort of ignoring the landscape like the Danish sticks, we turned it into this sort of gently melting circle that actually sort of takes the introverted courtyard and opens it up to the surroundings. So here you can see this sort of gently melting circle. as opposed to the sort of the Danish architecture that ignores the site conditions, almost like a stranded oyster. And so following the geometry, people are sort of invited to enter into the museum, where a route will take them to a series of galleries, all sort of surrounding this sort of a central sculptural courtyard. But the sort of the main sort of gesture of the building is that as soon as you enter into the museum, you get this sort of almost like a Greenlandic oasis in the middle of sort of this sort of Danish modernist housing. Because when you're in here, all you can see is the Greenlandic nature locally and sort of in the horizon, and Greenlandic art, and all the Danishness has been sort of carefully edited out of the perception. So there's still a letter missing. So all of these projects like deal very specifically with this sort of notion of public participation. But in one case, we actually try to sort of take it to almost like an extreme. Because these photos were taken outside our office in Copenhagen 5 to 6 years ago. Some of you might remember that Denmark had a cartoon crisis. A Danish newspaper commissioned 10 cartoonists to show that in the name of liberty of speech, we can make fun about everything, including the Prophet Muhammad. Roughly 1 billion people globally disagreed. And it led to riots. This is from Syria. But also, this is where our office is in Copenhagen. And this is a group of frustrated young Muslim guys taking their anger out at the dumpsters and cars. So when we got invited to compete to design an urban space right next to where our office is in Copenhagen, this is the street where our office is, in the most ethnically diverse neighborhood in all of Denmark. There's 60 different nationalities. It was clear that this project, more than anything, was going to be about creating a sense of ownership or of belonging or integration among a very diverse population. So I'm not going to explain the whole project, but we divided the square into what we call the red square. And I should note that this is actually not a collage. It's a photo taken from an airplane. It's currently under construction. So the red square, you have different patches of different shades of red that indicate different activities. You have the black market, and finally the green park, where even the paths are green. But to populate this urban space, we thought, instead of sort of plastering the whole thing with Danish design, we thought we could use it as an opportunity to create a sort of an urban global best practice. So we reached out to the community through a series of meetings and through the local media, through a homepage, and asking people to nominate elements from their other home country, sort of essentially sort of populating the entire space with these sort of found objects from everywhere in the world. And the main idea is that we don't eat Chinese food or Indian food to be nice to the Indians. We do it because sometimes you really feel like Indian food. And we don't put a Moroccan fountain there to be nice to the Moroccans, but because the Moroccans have an amazing tradition for architectural water features. So right now we're building this Moroccan fountain in Copenhagen. We have a mussel beach that incorporates elements from Los Angeles, Thailand, China, even the sort of outrageous Estonian swing. We're having some liability issues with the swing. We incorporated a Ukrainian slide. It's from Chernobyl, so we had to make a copy because the original is radioactive. You know, the sign on the red square is the sign from the red square. And even if you take something as simple as bollards from Ghana, when you put them in a gray Scandinavian context, they become like these precious, exotic objects. So like the whole design process became this sort of safari. It's sort of a curated process. So we found like these different bicycle racks. Bicycle racks are very important in Denmark. This one from Canada that incorporates a bicycle pump. Of course, because the majority of the immigrants have a Muslim or even Palestinian descent. From Israel, we chose a completely indestructible object. It's a manhole cover, like an inch of steel. And if you look at the benches, it's almost like a cultural study on different cultures, like from Mexico, this sort of S-curved bench that allows you to look the person you're sitting next to in the eyes. From Belgium, the complete opposite. Everybody's sort of looking away from each other. And basically, you know, a Japanese glass fiber slide, snow cannons from Sweden, bird cages in the trees from Holland, all the trees in the red square are red. Even in China, we found palm trees, and I didn't know this, but we found palm trees that literally grow in snow. So now we have real naturally growing palm trees in Copenhagen. As one last element, one of the sort of main indicators that you're in a foreign culture when you travel is actually the advertisement. So as a series of exotic lamps, we have these advertisements for things you can't buy in Denmark. My favorite one is this one. It's a Qatar dentist that has this funky sign. And of course the red square populated by a series of artifacts from the former Soviet and communist countries. The Moscowite was one of the crappiest cars ever produced. So basically the idea of this urban park is it's like almost the opposite of the romantic garden of the 19th century. When people couldn't travel, you could get this sort of feeling of the world. You could see a Chinese pagoda or a Greek temple. Here it's like practically the opposite, that instead of sort of perpetuating this sort of perception of a sort of petrified Denmark as this sort of homogeneous country, we're actually sort of really revealing the true cultural diversity of contemporary Copenhagen. And as architects, like completely surrendering our sort of design competence to this sort of global input from the entire neighborhood. The last class of projects that I'd like to talk about is what we call sort of social infrastructure. We basically started looking at infrastructure. We got commissioned by Audi to look at the future of cities. And you could ask yourself, why is Audi, a car manufacturer, interested in cities? Well, essentially because right now, cars are seen as the big problem in cities. Like they pollute, they're noisy, they create congestion. But 100 years ago, the big problem wasn't the car, it was horse shit. 100 years ago, you had like in New York, like every horse drops 22 pounds of horse shit per day. There was 11,000 dead carcasses on the streets of New York that had to be removed every year. And as you can see from these images, there was like piles of horse shit becoming this sort of environmental and hygienic disaster. And magically, we got saved by the automobile. Because compared to horses, cars are actually quite clean, quite safe. They don't run amok if they get stung by a bee. And essentially what we had to do is like speculate on this next evolution in urban mobility. If we look at Audi, it's a car company, but their tagline doesn't talk about cars, it talks about technology. So first of all, like if it's the car that's the problem, maybe we could reinvent the business model and save Audi. So we tried some diffusion brands. But then we thought maybe this sort of commitment to technology and maybe artificial intelligence could be the savior. Some of you might recognize Hal. Because we try to apply this sort of Kurzweilian perspective. Ray Kurzweil, the American inventor and futurist, who sort of identified that Moore's law, the idea that the performance of microprocessors doubles every 18 months on almost all measurable parameters, is part of an even bigger law, which is a constant acceleration in innovation or paradigm change. So if we look at the paradigm changes in human mobility, since the invention of the wheel, there's been like a gradual series of inventions. But if you look at this sort of multitude of innovations recently, there's a higher and higher frequency, but they actually don't deal with what propels the vehicle, but with what navigates the vehicle. Over the last 20 years, the driverless car has emerged. In 1998, these 8 cars drove 5,000 miles, very densely close together, autonomously. The DARPA challenge broke through 5 or 6 years ago, having an unmanned car drive through hundreds of miles of desert. Last year, Google revealed that they'd had the Google cars driving around the Bay Area unmanned. Eric Schmidt said, like, I can't understand that people are allowed to drive cars at all. Even though like driverless cars exist as a sort of prototypical level right now, in a lot of everyday elements, like for instance, like Copenhagen subway is driverless. Our planes are sort of driverless most of the time. And even in sort of this slide actually makes no sense, but even in luxury cars, like cruise control is getting increasingly sophisticated, and you have these sort of driverless features in all these cars. So essentially, what happens? Our cities have always been shaped by the way we move around. The pedestrian city of downtown Barcelona, the city of the horse cart, the extensions of Barcelona, the city of the car, in this case Los Angeles. And so if you compare an LA interchange with downtown Copenhagen, there's like a massive impact on our patterns of movement. So we ask ourselves, what happens when our cities become pollutionless, noiseless, and driverless? First of all, cars can actually drive much more compactly when they're sort of navigated with a machine precision and not some kind of unconcentrated human. That would allow us to sort of liberate at times 2/3 of the urban space that is currently reserved for cars, allowing for a sort of a much more dynamic and much more sort of interactive public realm, almost like a swarm. And it's not like we want to sort of prohibit cars. Like, cars are great to drive on the countryside. It's as soon as you come into the city that they become a nuisance. But if you look at these photos from New York, essentially all of the yellow cabs are in principle sort of prototypical driverless cars because they're driven by somebody else than the person who needs to go somewhere. So the main idea is that you can imagine in the future, instead of congestion taxes, when you enter the city limits, your manual override is disengaged and your individually driven car becomes sort of collectively coordinated in concert with all the other cars. We spoke with Audi's technicians, and they talked about one thing that's necessary is a more refined GPS system, and they talked about incorporated in the pavement. Then we discovered this company called Solar Roadways that have been commissioned by the US Department of Transportation to look at paving the roads of America with these shatterproof photovoltaic cells that become a sort of a distributed power production and distribution system, because the roads connect everything. They're looking at like incorporating low voltage LEDs, and they calculated that if you would pave all of the highways and roadways of the United States, you could actually, in principle, power the entire world. So we sort of tried to take this idea and imagine that in the inner cities, instead of like casting the functions of the city in concrete, we could create a much more sort of dynamic urban realm. We started imagining that, you could have like vectors, like if you see a blue arrow, it's time to move. But like, of course, like pedestrians would have like an aura of like almost like a sanctuary around them. And we started imagining, we applied it to Potsdamer Platz, the place in Europe with the first traffic light. How sort of, instead of like proportioning the urban space to the peak loads of car traffic, social programs like a concert or political rally or sports could actually spontaneously erupt. I went to Hanoi, where they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and play badminton like crazy on the middle of the streets. This could actually occur spontaneously everywhere, facilitated by the fact that the cars would actually know where to go. So we did a small sample of this for the Venice Biennale last year, where essentially we just took Potsdamer Platz, made the buildings out of foam, and glued them on a big flat screen, just looking at the life between the buildings. Do we have sound? So here's a little sample. just to sort of to pursue this idea, we've actually been pursuing it with Audi, and for those of you who go to the Design Miami at the Art Basel Miami, we're actually doing a prototype, including some of the features of pedestrian detection and this sort of continuous calculation of where the cars go as the Audi pavilion down there. So, of course, like this is some kind of projection into a certain future. Dealing with infrastructure, we were invited to look at the new gateway to Stockholm, northeast of Stockholm. They're designing 2 new highways that becomes the main arrival to downtown. And they wanted some kind of a landmark that could be the gate to Stockholm. But in fact, the size of the area in question was like, this is Arc de Triomphe in Paris. It's like the size of an urban neighborhood. So we thought like they probably need a master plan more than they need a landmark. Because the 2 highways separate the urban neighborhoods and the parks from each other. And what they need is like some kind of a connection. So we looked at if what they want is a landmark and what they need is a master plan and connectivity, what they actually have a lot of is excavation. Because they've just been digging sort of miles and miles of highway tunnels. So we proposed to sort of use all of this excavation material to create a man-made valley, almost like a big bowl that sort of blocks the noise from the cars and actually allows the different urban neighborhoods to grow all the way to the edge of this valley. So, so basically you get this sort of giant man-made bowl where the neighborhoods can actually really grow all the way to the edge, and you get like a big park surrounding the highways. The problem is that from the actual highway, when you arrive to Stockholm, you won't be able to see any of this, and they still wanted this landmark. So we thought like, it doesn't make any sense to put a big building here. Then we found this big weather satellite developed by NASA, and we thought that maybe like a gigantic floating mirror would actually allow the cars, as they pass over, they'll see the sort of the social life of the surroundings as a monument floating in the sky. And we tried just to put it in, and it looked kind of promising. And the basic idea is that, of course, it's going to be it's a 100-meter diameter, almost like 300 feet. And the idea is that as it's tied down, it's going to be pulling these pistons. Also, the entire sort of part of the globe that's exposed to the sun will incorporate photovoltaics that are going to fuel part of the neighborhood, but it's going to take 10% and use it to pump air and heat into the balloon to keep it floating. So basically we need to sort of have a 15 degrees Celsius higher temperature inside and keep a higher pressure. And basically there's a single rod and then these cables. So even if there's a catastrophe, it won't land on the cars. So we sort of proposed this, like the big master plan with the valley and the landmark as this sort of completely immaterial floating object that would reflect the life around it. Miraculously, we won the competition and are now struggling to make it happen.